Hello, I am Marcia Ishii Eiteman, Senior Scientist at Pesticide Action Network North America, based in Oakland, California, in the United States. Pesticide Action Network is an organization and a network that is part of a global international network that links local and international consumer, labor, health, environment, and agriculture groups into an international People's Action Network. Together, we challenge the global proliferation of pesticides, defend basic rights to health and environmental quality, and work to ensure the transition to a just and viable food system. Transforming our food and farming systems into ecologically vibrant and socially just systems is very much part of our work. And so that is why I'm here today to talk to you about how agroecology really represents one of our most powerful solutions going forward for food and farming systems today. The good news is that farmers around the world have the ability to produce an abundance of healthy, nourishing food while overcoming climate change and restoring the ecosystem functions that we depend on. All this is possible, but it will take an agroecological transformation of our farming systems. What is agroecology? At its core, agroecology is a dynamic approach to the study, design, and management of sustainable farming systems. It integrates ecological sciences and principles with local and indigenous knowledge and practice. Agroecology is continually evolving, drawing on rich traditions of ancestral knowledge developed over many millennia, and integrating cutting-edge innovations by farmers and ecological scientists working together to meet present-day challenges. Agroecologists treat farmland, the surrounding landscape, and in fact all the components in the agroecosystem, farmer included, as linked through complex webs of ecological interactions that stimulate natural processes like nutrient cycling and biotic pest regulation in highly beneficial ways. Key agroecological principles include enhancing the biological diversity of farming systems and working with rather than against natural processes. Many organic farmers follow agroecological principles in designing their farms, although that's not always the case, as we have some examples around the world, particularly here in the U.S., with some large industrial-scale organic operations. But when an organic farm's goals, objectives, structure, and design are rooted in agroecological principles, then certainly that farm can be said to represent a form of agroecological practice. Agroecology, then, as a framework, also goes beyond specific sets of practices by taking a broad systems approach to farming in which people and communities are recognized as part of the agroecosystem. Agroecology encompasses not only the ecological, but also the social, economic, and cultural dimensions of sustainable farming systems. Agroecology is also a social movement, one that is led by small-scale producers the world over who are calling for the transformation of power structures in society to enable peasant farmers to overcome the structural inequities that are embedded in today's food and farming systems. Now, materially, this means returning control of seeds, land, water, and the commons to the communities that are actually producing food to nourish themselves or producing other agricultural products to maintain their health and livelihoods. So there is an explicitly political dimension of agroecology, because true sustainability in farming simply cannot happen without democratization of the farming system. Well, what does agroecology look like on the ground? This biodiverse farm in Mexico is a good example. It draws on agroecological principles to implement a variety of practices that stimulate natural ecological processes, such as building healthy soil, maintaining efficient nutrient cycling, regulating pests, conserving water, and providing food year-round to family and community. The farm's biodiversity makes it both economically and ecologically resilient to stress and better able to withstand the unpredictable weather associated with climate change, for example. And on a related note, many agroecological farms in Central America have been shown from extensive participatory surveys to survive and recover much more quickly from hurricanes in comparison with conventionally managed farms. The integration of agroforestry and deep-rooted perennial crops and livestock in silvopastoral systems, such as that pictured here in the photo above, has the added benefit of capturing large amounts of atmospheric carbon and storing it in the soil, both in the below ground and above ground plant matter. Now, the implications of this carbon sequestration for climate change are huge. What we're finding is that agroecology is not only enabling farmers to adapt to climate change by having these more resilient systems that can withstand stresses, can withstand drought and flooding and so on, but what we're finding is that these systems are also proving significant in actually mitigating climate change. Right now, we have about 200 billion metric tons of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's contributing to global warming. Soil scientists have drawn on a large body of data and estimate that if agroecological practices, such as a silvopastoral farm and intercropping, such as in the picture below, if these ecological practices are adopted widely around the world, they could together draw down over 300 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, 367. The estimates are general, but what we are seeing is that this is a huge amount of carbon dioxide that could be drawn down. That's more than enough to enable us to begin to actually reverse the course of climate change. Of course, we can't solve the problem through transforming agriculture alone, so long as we continue to put more carbon out into the atmosphere. But the potential of agroecological farming as a climate solution is clear. Now, there are thousands of examples of farmers practicing agroecology around the world. In these examples, what we see is that social and economic equity are central because, as I mentioned before, there's no system sustainability without equity. And that's why in so many agroecological systems, we see this radical transformation of social relationships between women and men at the household level, within communities, in new cooperative market structures, and in equitable research partnerships between farmers and scientists, in which farmers are playing a leading role from the start in asking the questions, in designing the research process, in conducting the research, and in analyzing the results. And these are very exciting transformations that are happening around the world. Agroecology has also taken root in the U.S. Across the country, farmers are showing how this can be done with multiple benefits to the soil, to the health of the communities, to the productivity on the farm. Carmen Fernholz in Minnesota has been growing organic corn and soybean in diversified systems that include cover cropping, rotation with flax and alfalfa, and landscape diversification. His farm has been productive, profitable, and resilient over the past 40 years, enabling him to survive commodity crop price swings and bad weather. So agroecology in the heart of the Midwest in corn and soybean production is very real and promising. Along these lines, Dwayne Beck, who is a corn grower and farm manager at Dakota Lakes Research Farm in South Dakota, he had this to say. He says, "I'm a corn grower, and get this, I grow wheat, peas, lentil, flax, soybeans, sunflowers, and perennials." He goes on, "We do all those things. We can still keep a high percentage of corn in our rotation, but throwing other things in makes it better. It brings you economic advantages and cost savings that you sometimes just don't see until you do it." So that's right from South Dakota. In Vermont, the Chouanier Dairy Farm, up in the right-hand corner pictured here, uses rotations of deep-rooted radish and alfalfa to address soil compaction and enable air and water to permeate the soil, while also increasing the soil's water-holding capacity. Now, boosting a soil's organic matter by just 1% can increase that soil's ability to hold water by some 25,000 gallons per acre. And that is a critical characteristic, both in times of drought and flooding. Meanwhile, we've got agroecological fruit and vegetable production here in California. Singing Frog's farm in the lower left has achieved really astounding levels of 5 to 6% soil organic matter in its fields through a combination of no-till cover cropping, crop rotation, and the integration of animals. Paul Kaiser, pictured here, has also planted thousands of native perennials in hedgerows to support bees and other pollinators. And we've got urban farms and community gardens across the country, often managed by young people who are increasingly in the forefront of creating new models of healthy, just food systems. So U.S. farmers are showing that agroecology works here too. The point is that agroecology delivers. We see this over and over in countries around the world. And increasingly, policymakers, researchers, and leaders of UN agencies agree with farmers that agroecology works. As UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food a few years ago, Olivier de Schutter had this to say. He said, "To feed 9 billion people in 2050, we urgently need to adopt the most efficient farming techniques available. Agroecology, done right, can produce just as much food while conserving natural resources and improving ecological resilience." Indeed, independent science and numerous UN reports show us that these success stories are not isolated examples, but are in fact the norm where agroecological practices have been adopted. And this is really, really good news for the planet. One UN analysis, the bottom one in this list, looked at 114 projects in 24 African countries and found that yields more than doubled when agroecological practices had been used. Another Essex University study looked at 286 projects in 57 countries and found that agroecology increased production by 79%, 100% of the projects had increased water efficiency, and over 3/4 showed decreased pesticide use. So good all around. And more reports have been coming out every year. PAN, Pesticide Action International, recently published a book documenting farmers' successes in using agroecology to eliminate their use of highly hazardous pesticides, a class of pesticides that has been targeted for action by the UN International Conference on Chemicals Management. And more reports are coming out every year. So with all this good news, why isn't agroecology everywhere? While agroecology is spreading around the world and is being taken up by farmers' associations and collaboratives all over, we rarely see or hear about it much here. The reality is that most national agricultural policies, international trade objectives, research dollars, and media coverage focus almost exclusively on one model, the industrial model of agriculture. And so they're leaving out all these rich studies that I've just been talking about, these rich experiences. This kind of exclusive focus on the industrial model of agriculture has everything to do with the political and economic agendas of the most influential actors on the global food stage, namely the agribusiness corporations and the governments that they influence. This is illustrated in this schema here, this diagram, that was produced by the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES, in its report earlier this year in 2016. So here's the problem we're facing today. We have seen an unprecedented wave of corporate consolidation of agribusiness interests over the past decade, from the seed and chemical input sector to grain traders to the grocery retail sector. This slide here shows what's happened in the seed sector. In the U.S. alone, over a decade ago, we had over 200 independent seed retailers. Now we have just a handful. 3 of the biggest pesticide and biotech companies control over half the world's commercial seed supply. Monsanto alone controls over 1/4 of that global market. And we're seeing further consolidation every month with recent mergers of Dow and DuPont. Monsanto and Bayer is in the works. Syngenta and ChemChina are also in talks. Here's what Monsanto actually said a couple of years ago. What you're seeing is not just the consolidation of seed companies, it's really a consolidation of the entire food chain. And this is a problem when just a handful of corporations are gaining really effective control of the entire food chain. This has implications for all of us. And it's this consolidation of market share that translates directly into power and influence over our governments and over the public policy-making process. And this influence, this corporate influence over public policy takes many forms. The agribusiness lobby, over $500 million has been expended in just a matter of a decade by the pesticide and biotech companies to influence Congress and legislation. There's a revolving door between agribusiness corporations and government agencies that has, over the past 15 years, ensured the consistent passage of very industry-friendly laws and regulations around biotech seeds and pesticides. And we're seeing patterns of suppression of science in our public agencies when that science is considered unfavorable to industry's bottom line. We see this influence in our National Research Council. There are current cases pending around how USDA has suppressed the science of its own entomologists. All of this is a very disturbing trend. And along with that, we see minimal public funding for agroecological research from USDA and land-grant universities. And these are studies that have been published. The bottom one refers to an examination of USDA funding, and less than 15% of its research and education grants have gone to work that will support agroecology, with the bulk going in other directions. So this brings me to my final point, that democracy matters and civic engagement matters in reclaiming our public agencies and institutions, and in calling upon them to do the critical work in advancing and transforming our food and farming systems towards the kind that we really need, that is grounded in ecological integrity and that is really dedicated to social justice. And that's why farmers, farm workers, and urban food justice activists are organizing at local, state, and national levels to build public support and direct public policymaker attention to the need for both an agroecological and a democratic transformation of our food system. I spoke recently with one Iowa farmer, right there in the middle, Denise O'Brien, who founded the Women Food and Ag Network nearly 20 years ago. And we were talking about the importance of living soil and her experiences on her farm with building up really rich, deep, beautiful soil. And this is a real challenge for our Midwest farmers who have been producing corn and soybean in monoculture for years and years, and who are now recognizing the need to restore their degraded soils to health. So we were talking about soil, and I asked her what Midwest farmers most needed to be able to restore their soils to the kind of soil that she had. Denise had a three-word answer. She said, campaign finance reform. So in other words, she told me, get the money out of politics and get corporations out of government. We won't be able to get to the really rich, vibrant, agroecologically based food and farming system that we need so long as we have this persistent corporate influence over our government agencies. We're just not going to get there. So we need policies and programs that support farmers' transition towards agroecological practices and that take corporations out of the equation. This means policies that ensure farmers' and workers' livelihoods, so fair prices, price floors, better supply management policies, policies that provide secure access to land, water, and diverse and locally adapted seeds, fair wages, and an end to structural overproduction and dumping food on local markets in other countries that destabilize their farming systems as well. It also means public scientists stepping up to work in partnership with family farmers and dedicating their efforts to support farmers in this nationwide transition that we need towards more agroecological systems. It means listening to farmers, learning and working alongside farmers in this exploration of how to really fuel this national transition. It means journalists bringing the world's attention to the powerful solutions that agroecological farmers are already advancing here in the U.S. and around the globe. We need these stories to inspire us. So many people don't realize just how powerful and effective agroecological practice is, and how really transformative it has been for the communities, whether in Iowa, California, India, Senegal, around the world where these transformations are happening. So we need these stories to be out there. And it means all of us coming together to take back control of our farming systems, our food systems, to pull out corporate influence from our public agencies and work together to build an ecologically vibrant, socially just, and climate resilient food and farming system for all. There's a lot that can be done. We can join our efforts by working together, learning about what is happening at all levels across the country and internationally. There's much that we can do, and I'm really inspired that so much is going on and we can really make the change that we can, that is required. So the good news is that we have the ability, and farmers have the ability to produce this abundance of nourishing food while overcoming climate change and restoring ecosystem functions. It's possible. We'll take an agroecological and a democratic transformation of our food systems, but it can be done. Thank you for joining me today.